temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." Amen. One day, when I was a child, I asked my dad the question, "What is it you do?" He said to me, "They call me a hydraulic engineer. I'm a plumber, son." And he was a plumber, a foreman plumber in the strip mill at Ravenscraig Steelworks in Motherwell, which some of you will be of an age to remember. And for that reason, I have always loved watching some of the old films that you can get of seeing the scene of the strip mill or of a steelwork. The sparks, the smoke, the white molten metal being poured, and the silhouettes of the people who worked there. And those films always stir for me another memory. And the memory is of my dad working late. And his dinner was kept warm between two Pyrex plates, sat on top of a pot of gently simmering water on the cooker. This was the days before microwave ovens. And when he would come home literally filthy, covered in soot that seemed to permeate the very pores of his face. I have always loved Isaiah chapter 2. I have always loved that image of the mountain of the Lord somehow rising above the other mountains. And to quote from another prophet, and of justice flowing down like a river, and of the weapons of war being transformed into the tools that would help feed people. Now that would be a redistribution of wealth that would give a budget for the soul. I've always loved Isaiah chapter 2. But it's not a smooth image. It's not that straightforward. I described it in my own head as a jaggy image. And it's a jaggy image for a number of reasons. One reason it's a jaggy image is because for these things to happen that we read about in Isaiah chapter 2, for these things to happen, God will need to act. This isn't a horoscope, this is a prophecy. And a prophecy speaks into a situation about God and what God is going to do in the world. Ultimately, kingdom come will be an action of God in the world. That means that it is both irresistible when it comes, but it also means it's a bit uncertain as to when it will come. And Advent, in a sense, flags for us again this idea of being the period of waiting. So if one of the jaggy points is this requires the action of God, another point, and this is complex and serious, another point is for this to happen, the nation of Israel will itself have to be transformed. It will have to be, then as now, transformed into the people of promise, who are a people who are intended to be a blessing for all the nations. For this to happen, Israel itself needs to be transformed. And that is why we should be very careful indeed of associating the modern state of Israel with the Old Testament people of God. For transformation is also required there. Second jaggy point. And the third jaggy point, which was really the one that caught my attention, that I hadn't thought about very often before, is the sheer heavy industry that's involved in this image. The human effort and sweat and involvement in this process, where we hear the clanging of metal, indeed, as weapons of war become tools in order to feed the people in the world. This is an image that involves some heavy industry. However, despite these points, there is no doubt whatsoever that this image is presented in the book of Isaiah in order to inspire hope in people. It is offered as an image of hope that is meant to inspire us to lean into the direction that the image speaks about. The image is painted like a scene on the horizon, calling us forward. Even though we can't yet see the roads we have to travel, even although we do not know what turns we are going to have to make to get there, yet this image beckons us. It calls us to live in its direction, calling us forward, calling us into the future, indeed, in some senses, calling us home. As I thought about this, it reminded me of Highway 101. Highway 101 is the road that runs from Halifax to Yarmouth in Nova Scotia, Canada. Although I normally exited 1 hour from Halifax at junction 10 to the town of Wolfville in the Annapolis Valley. Highway 101 was okay to drive in that most of it was a kind of dual carriageway, but because it crosses over the top of the province, it's also a very exposed road. And one Monday night in November, I think in 2018, I had been teaching in Halifax. I finished about 8 o'clock and began to drive home and got caught in a snowstorm. The snow came fast, it came heavy, it obscured the lanes in the road, it hid the central reservation, and just as worryingly, it masked the deep ditches that are either side of the highway in order for drainage. It was a long, hard journey home. My colleagues later told me I should have just stopped for the night and booked into a hotel. This would have been the plan for the future. But on Highway 101, there is not so much a bend, there's a curve, and it curves round to the left. And when you reach that curve, you're still quite high up, but you come round the corner, and there in front of you, dropping down, is a beautiful view of the Annapolis Valley. You see Blomidon and the Bay of Fundy over on your right-hand side, and on your left-hand side, if it was nighttime, you would see the twinkling lights of the town of Wolfville. You weren't home yet, but the image itself inspired you to keep going. You weren't home yet, but home did lie in the distance, calling you to follow on. And that is what this image here is intended to do. It's an image that calls us forward. It's an image that calls us into the future. It is an image that calls us to lean into what God is doing and what God will do. This image is intended to inspire hope. And some people have taken that quite literally. And today I'm thinking about someone who some of you may have heard of. His name is Shane Claiborne. And I'm thinking about Shane Claiborne and his organization called RAW. Claiborne is an American writer and activist, somewhat schooled in the tradition of the late Tony Campolo. And Claiborne is the founder member of this organization called RAW, which in fact is war spelt backwards. You're checking it. Go and check it. It is. It's not hard. There's only 3 letters in that one. That's a kind of easy one. And what they do is, quite literally, they take guns and they transform them into tools that are intended for work in the garden. And this requires considerable effort. And in the book, they talk about the heat that is required in order to melt the metal, and it can't be too hot and it can't be too cold, and how then they have to forge this metal into something new. And they talk about the clanging of the metal, because to change one thing into another, it requires steel upon steel. Now you might go, well, this is very pretty and this is very nice, but here is the reality. The reality is that every day in the United States of America, 125 people are killed with guns and more than 200 are shot or wounded. And you may well say, therefore, in my cynicism, it's nice to have a few garden trowels, but it changes nothing in the world. But Claiborne and others take these tools and see them as symbols of hope. And they take them with them and they give them to people, including people who have been the victims of violence, as they seek through their traveling and their talking and their educating to reduce violence in the United States of America. There's something almost prophetic in what they write. And they write this, Claiborne and Martin, in their book, Beating Guns. They say this: the world doesn't have to be this way. And we can begin by telling the truth about the world as it is now. And we can reimagine how the world could be a better, safer, and more beautiful place. We can begin reimagining our world by telling stories of lament and of lives lost. Then, through the prophetic hope that we have, we can transform metal and the world. Hope makes us live differently, unsatisfied with the way things are, and it gives us the audacity to believe that they can be different. This is what hope does. Hope inspires. Yet we don't have to travel that far for such dramatic examples. I met Hope last week. When I saw her, I could see that she had lines on her face and silver in her hair. She's no naive newbie in this world. She's lived a bit. But Hope turns up every week. And she turns up to pray. And she turns up to pray even though she doesn't always get what she asks for. And she misses her partner very much. But still she turns up. And she turns up to pray. And she turns up to care. And she turns up to care even though sometimes that care is thrown back in her face. She turns up to care even though she's disappointed by the reactions that she faces. If she worked in a food bank, she would turn up again to work in the food bank, even though one person might have dumped the food beside the bin on the road going home. Still, she turns up. And she turns up to teach. She turns up to teach children about God and faith and Jesus. And she turns up to teach them, and she'll turn up another week after this. And she turns up, even though they may not in the end accept what she says, yet she turns up. And the thing about Hope is she's neither vain nor false. For despite her disappointment, Hope is not determined by the reactions of those and that to which she turns her attention. Instead, Hope is shaped by a deep conviction that things do not need to be the way they are, and they can be different, and God is coming, and the world one day will be transformed. That's just a parable about Christian hope. But Christian hope, is forged in a fire. In the heat of the day, with sweat and effort, where swords and spears were present, and hammers drove metal nails through flesh and perhaps even chipped the bone. They crucified the one they called Jesus of Nazareth. Oh, Nazareth, can anything good come out of Nazareth? They did not like what he did, and they did not like what he said. And then, not for the first time, and undoubtedly not from the last, religious and political power conspired to silence their opponents in an act of populism. Not for the first time and not for the last, religious and political powers will conspire to silence acts of resistance in popular acts of violence. But they could not silence him. Death could not hold him. The grave could not contain him, because God demonstrated with power that this Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God. And so in that furnace, hope, Christian hope, is born. I guess I'm just going to have to confess that Sarah Bessey's book, Field Notes for the Wilderness, has probably been one of my favourite books of the year. I'm saying that because I keep going back to it time after time. And in that book, she has a chapter where she writes to people whose hope has been damaged, not simply by their experiences of life, but by their experiences of the church. And here I want to riff on some of her words. If you're listening to this, your hope has brought you this far. Hold on to your hope. You deserve it. And listen for the clanging of the metal. You have carried your hope through sadness and loss. Your hope does not deny the problems of life. Your hope is not a naive optimism. It is not the perspective from a position of privilege. Rather, it is the power of the Spirit within you. Listen for the clanging of the metal. Let your hope show itself. Let it show itself in your tears, in your lament, in your praise, in your laughter, in your kindness and dignity, in your actions and words, in your cries for justice, in your concern for your family, for your friends, for the stranger, and indeed for yourself. Listen for the clanging of the metal. Your hope. Your hope in the goodness and welcome and love of God is a wonderful and stubborn thing. Hold on to your hope. Tend it. Cultivate it. Take it with you when you walk away from toxic situations, and take it with you into your work and ministry. Walk towards the vision in Isaiah, because God is walking towards you. And listen for the clanging of the metal. We've used this prayer already. I use this prayer to conclude. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. We're going to be led as we respond in 2 songs as we finish.